Have you ever found yourself wondering how you can get into the stock market, without having to compromise your faith? Well, that's the big question we're diving into today. We are going to break down the exact framework that professional Sharia-compliant investors use to screen stocks so you can feel totally confident when you invest. All right, let's get right into it. The question on so many people's minds is this: can you actually be a part of all this incredible growth in tech and AI? We're talking companies like Nvidia, Apple, or Meta, and still stay true to your faith? The answer is a definite yes, but it's not a free-for-all. It takes a clear, structured method to get it right. So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the foundation, the framework for faithful investing. Then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the two-step screening process. First, the business itself, then its financials. We'll even dig into why certain numbers are used. And finally, we'll talk about the absolutely crucial final step of purification and leave you with some tools to do all this with confidence. Look, if you want to invest in global markets while upholding your principles, you can't just wing it. You really need a trusted, consistent framework to lean on. And that framework comes from an organization called AAOIFI. The easiest way to think of them is as the global standard setters for all things Islamic finance. Their guidelines, specifically what's known as Shariah Standard No. 21, give us the global benchmark for screening stocks. It is, without a doubt, the gold standard. The AAOIFI process is actually pretty straightforward when you break it down. It's really just two simple checks. First, what's called a qualitative screen, which basically asks, what does this company actually do? And second, a quantitative screen, which asks, okay, how does it manage its money? Okay, let's tackle step one. This part is all about what a company's core business is. And honestly, for most of the big tech companies, they pass this test with flying colors. Why? Because what they do, making software, phones, AI chips, is generally considered permissible. So the first thing you have to do is filter out any company whose main business is something prohibited. This means things like conventional banking based on interest, or riba. Also on the list are alcohol, gambling, pork products, certain types of weapons, and adult entertainment. If a company makes most of its money from any of these, it's a non-starter. Simple as that. Now, for step two, where we get into the numbers. See, even if a company has a totally permissible business, say it sells phones, it's still operating in the modern financial world. And that means it almost certainly has some interest-bearing debt, or it earns interest on its cash. And that interest, riba, is prohibited. So we've got to check the books. The very first financial test we look at is debt. A company's total interest-bearing debt cannot be more than 30% of its market capitalization. That's the total value of all its shares. This rule is here to make sure the company isn't drowning in debt, which is a really key principle in Islamic finance. And next, we take that same 30% rule and apply it to the company's investments. Any non-compliant interest-earning things the company holds, like bonds, also have to make up less than 30% of its market cap. And finally, we come to the income test. Now this is often the biggest hurdle, especially for those big tech companies that are sitting on mountains of cash. The rule is the total non-permissible income a company earns, like interest on its bank accounts, must be less than 5% of its total revenue. So let's do a quick recap of those three key tests. Both the debt and the investments have to be less than 30% of the market cap. And that impure income, that has to stay below 5% of total revenue. These three ratios, they're really the backbone of the entire financial screening process. Right about now, you're probably asking, okay, but where did they even get these numbers from? 30%? 5%? Why not 25 or 10? Well, they aren't just pulled out of thin air. There's some deep scholarly reasoning behind them. So that 30% rule, it's actually rooted in Islamic tradition. It comes from a hadith where the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was advising someone about how much of their wealth to give in their will, and he said, 1/3 is much. Islamic scholars took this principle and applied it to finance. They saw it as a guideline for tolerance. I mean, in an ideal world, a company would be 100% pure, but we live in a conventional economy where that's nearly impossible. So scholars determined that anything below 1/3, which is about 33%, is a tolerable amount of impurity for a business that's otherwise doing good work. That's where we get the conservative 30% threshold. Now, here's where things get really dynamic. A stock's compliance status isn't set in stone. It can literally be compliant one day and non-compliant the next. And the reason for that is one word: volatility. So how in the world does that happen? Well, it all comes down to the math. Remember those ratios? Two of them, the debt and investment ratios, use the company's market cap as the denominator. So imagine the stock price is high. The market cap is huge. The debt ratio is comfortably below 30%. Everything's fine. But then the market crashes. The stock price plummets. The company's debt hasn't changed, but its market cap, that denominator, has just shrunk. All of a sudden, that same amount of debt is a much bigger piece of the pie, and it can easily push the ratio right past that 30% limit. And just like that, a compliant stock becomes non-compliant. This is exactly why you have to keep an eye on things. All right, let's say you've done your homework. You found a stock that passes the business screen and all the financial screens. You're almost there, but your work isn't quite done. There's one final, absolutely essential step called purification. Here's the thing. Even compliant companies still earn a tiny bit of non-permissible income. So you need to purify any earnings you get from that stock. And the process is super simple. First, you find the exact percentage of the company's income that was impure. Second, you figure out your total profit or dividend from that stock. And finally, you just multiply the two together to get the exact amount you need to donate to charity. For example, maybe you check a company's Shariah report, and it says 1.33% of its revenue came from interest. Okay, so if you earned, say, $100 in dividends from that stock, you would just need to donate $1.33 to charity. That's it. Your earnings are now purified. Now, this might sound like a tiny detail, but it is fundamentally important. This small act of purification is what ensures your investment returns are fully cleansed, making them totally acceptable from an Islamic perspective. It really gives you that ultimate peace of mind. Okay, I know what you might be thinking. This sounds like a ton of work. I have to dig through financial reports, track market caps every day, calculate percentages. But here's the great news. You absolutely do not have to do all of that manually. We're living in an amazing time where technology has made this whole process incredibly easy. There are fantastic fintech apps out there like Zoya, Mosafa, and Tabadolad that do all the heavy lifting for you. They automate the entire AAOIFI screening process, they track compliance in real time, and they even tell you the exact purification percentage you need. It's a game changer. So there you have it. The framework is no longer some big mystery. You know about the two-step screen, you understand the financial ratios and why they exist, and you know how to purify your earnings. And best of all, the tools to do it are right at your fingertips. So the only question left is, what's going to be the first stock you screen?